Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton. And this week we are going to talk about the 10 secrets of highly successful couples. So I think it's important to give a disclaimer for this episode. We talked about it briefly last week, that this is just an article that Mark found that he really liked. And you can find millions of articles.
Right. There are going to be a lot of articles. 5 things that you should do to make a happy marriage. 10 things, 15 things. Because of my interest in relationships in my work, I tend to look at all of them, and some of them are very similar, but all of them are good. I haven't found anything yet that I'd go, oh no, that's not right. So
Right.
these are just 10 ideas. It's not the 10 ideas to make a better relationship, but I think if you tried to use these in your relationship would be better. But
right.
It could be any list of 10 things to make your relationship better.
Well, there's no one right way to be married. I think that's really what it comes down to. And because people are so individual, what's going to work for one couple isn't going to work for another. And so I think these are just patterns that I think a group of people probably noticed of, hey, these are the couples that are successful, right?
Right.
So,
well, and that's John Gottman's whole line of work for 40 years. Is looking at, characteristics of successful couples compared to characteristics of unsuccessful couples. So you're right. I mean, as I look at the 10, they're pretty general, and you could find these on many lists, but they're good things. And you and I have an interest in relationships, so we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah. So I thought we would start with your line of work, Mark, and that you have seen a lot of unhappy couples. And what are some patterns?
Well, usually those are the only ones who come into my
That's true. That's true. Yeah, you see the unhappy couples almost exclusively. And so what are some patterns that you've noticed? Is it kind of the opposite of these 10 things, or what's a big thing that's a red flag for you?
Actually, my answer is probably going to be a little bit more involved than you wanted. But so I was thinking that nowadays, and I think from when I started to now, there's certainly been a change in the amount of, I'll call it stress or anxiety that couples have, or individuals within the couple have. And I think that has a lot to do with work, usually, if it work, and then if you have kids, then you're already trying to, say, build a career, and then you have, both parents are working, then that's doubly difficult because there's not a lot of time, and then you put kids in the mix, or sometimes even just pets in the mix. And so I think the stress is greater now than I recall it being about 20 years ago. So I think our culture has changed. Now, what that does, though, is then that increase in stress or anxiety changes your ability to really have a productive relationship, I think. Because you're dealing with all this internal stress and worry. And so what it does mostly is, I think, it makes it hard to listen to each other. And so many episodes, we've talked about the importance of, at least in couple communication, that I think the most important piece is your ability to listen. How well do you listen to the other person and really understand? And I think that underlying anxiety or stress makes it very difficult to do that, because there's always something else kind of in the back of your head, that you're worrying about. Like, should I do it? Even for household chores, like, because I hear this all the time. Oh, I should do the dishes. It's not necessarily, oh, I need to go finish this project off for work tonight. But, and if you're both working during the day, then when is the time that you actually take care of those household things that every house with children need, dishes, cleaning, all of that stuff. And so there's so much. And so and I talk about this probably with most couples is how do you handle your stress and what do you do for yourself that
Mhm.
in order to de-stress. And so this does tie into these 10 things, is that when you're stressed and you feel like there's so much to do, the ability to actually take time and focus on each other, like
Yes.
sit down even in the evening for, honestly, I say just do it for 15 minutes. And
Mhm.
I get pushback on that
Yeah.
from a lot of couples because they really believe that they don't have 15 minutes or half hour to sit down and connect with their partner. So that was a long way to say that a lot of these things we're going to talk about today actually have to do with communication and spending time together.
Mhm.
And the increase in stress and anxiety makes it very difficult for couples to do that. So I think that's kind of the general thing I see. Not enough time focusing on each other. You date, right? Like
Mhm.
if you're dating, that's easy.
Yep.
Or for most couples, it's easy because it's new. You get
Mhm.
married in long-term relationships, you forget how important it is just to spend time with each other.
Yeah, so we talked about, my idea of someday I'm going to write a book, the three, the three components of marriage, right? Or like the three areas of marriage that couples have to be good at.
Hmm.
They need to be good friends,
Yeah,
right? They need to be good friends, they need to be good lovers, right? So good romantic partners, and they need to be good coworkers, right?
right.
They need to work well together. And I think so often couples they get so focused on that being a good coworker, right?
Hmm.
Couples get stuck in that because you are running a house together and you're so busy that you get so focused, and you can get really good at being coworkers, but you don't have an emotional or intimate relationship with most of your coworkers,
No,
right?
no.
And so, you really have to be able to find time and make yourself shift into the role of couple, like romantic partners.
Well, and Gottman says that friendship is the basis of intimacy, which I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
And so it's not that all friends or friendship move into that intimate sphere, but I
Yep.
think you have to have that. And I
Yeah.
remember back when I was doing my dissertation, on gay male relationships, and
Mhm.
what was interesting to me is and and I think I've said this before, the similarities between heterosexual and gay relationships are very, very strong because they're just kind of these basic concepts that one can have to have a good relationship. But what stood out to me is often they talked about how they became friends first
Yep.
before it moved into either the romantic or the sexual part of the relationship. And I think we've had episodes before we talked about that I think sometimes couples move too quickly into that other phase as opposed to really getting to know each other and being friends.
Mhm.
And for some of the couples that come in, I often try and get them to go back and think about what was it like when you were dating? How were you different?
Yep.
And every time there's a component of we spent more time together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well,
if that's the basis of your falling in love, spending time, which makes sense to me,
yep.
then if you want to have a healthy relationship throughout the lifespan and you're in a long-term relationship, you've got to spend time together.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I can't help reflecting on, the evolution of mine and Curtis's relationship. And I mean, we spent a lot of time just talking, forming
Hmm.
that foundation, that friendship. And not that every couple or you have to do it this way to be successful, but Curtis and I think it was like probably it was weeks before he even kissed me for the first
Hmm.
time. I mean,
Hmm.
I would say we were exclusively, I mean, after we decided, okay, yeah, we're an exclusive couple, we're going to exclusively date. Even after that period, it still took the further 2 weeks before he even kissed me.
Hmm.
And that was something that I really appreciated. And, to him, it's just kissing somebody. It meant something to him. He wasn't
Hmm.
just, he went willy nilly. And so do that. And that was something that I really appreciated. And so, and not that you can't go faster, right? Not that it has to go
Right,
that way. I
right,
mean,
right. I don't want to imply that. I just
yeah,
what I'm implying is that the friendship piece is really important
yeah,
to maintain
yes,
throughout the length of the relationship.
yeah. Well, and I think it's important to establish too. I mean, so because especially if you get into a relationship and you're good friends and things progress really quickly, and then you get into that, I guess, intimacy component or you get into a sexual component, if you jump to that too quickly, and then it's really good for both of you and there's good sexual intimacy, if you haven't taken the time to develop a friendship, then that can make it difficult or that can make it more likely, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that can make it more likely that you're going to move too quickly through the relationship or there could be that risk.
Right. And here's the problem with it is that, as we talked about before, that intense, physical relationship, which comes with most new relationships, that's really
Hmm.
important. I
Yeah.
think I've said that before, that was actually another component of long-term successful relationships is that people feel that intensity. But the problem that I've seen, and I have seen it in some couples, is that if they focus too much on that, and they'll say, our sexuality is really good, but then they're missing this friendship piece. And
Mm.
and so what happens again in any long-term relationship, eventually that those hormones, it lasts like 6 months to 2 years, those hormones start going back down, and you aren't as sexual.
Hmm.
And so if you then, in 2 years you aren't as sexual and you don't have the friendship piece, then you're in trouble because you
Yeah.
don't have that basis to keep you going. And
Hmm.
that does happen for a lot of couples. And so and again, I'm echoing what you're saying. It's not that that is necessarily a bad thing to have to go quickly into that sexual intensity. It's just you really have to focus on do we have a friendship also, and not just we're good together sexually.
Yeah, and because I mean that is an important component, right, to a relationship, like you said. I mean that sexual chemistry and having that physical attraction and that desire, that is an important component in a relationship. But I mean, and it's not even a bad thing, but you have to make sure that you are having couple time that is non-sexual.
Right, right. Because I think a lot of people make the mistake, the assumption that if our sexuality is good, then our friendship is good. They're
And
different.
they
They're
really
total.
are.
They're totally different. And I mean, you could. I mean, if you think about it, you can have a good sexual relationship with someone that you really aren't friends with necessarily.
Hmm.
People do that all the time nowadays, and without their intention is not to have an emotionally intimate relationship. So it's you really have to focus on that friendship piece.
Yeah, for if you want a long-term,
Yeah,
you
a
know, com
successful long-term relationship, you have to be friends.
right, because it's that friendship component is where you learn if you're compatible long term or not, right?
Right.
That's where you get to know each other. Because I mean, and intimacy and sexual intimacy, it's important to know each other intimately, right, in that area. But like you said, that doesn't make a good friendship. And you get to know each other and I guess, find your quirks and the things that maybe you have to try to work through in a relationship. Those are found outside of sexuality, right?
Right. And just as the takeaway for our listeners, sexuality will change
It will.
through the span of the relationship.
Yeah.
And it often, I mean, it goes up and down, certainly, the intensity, but often over time that intensity decreases,
Hmm.
because you can't burn so hot for all of your life. But the thing with friendship is that I think it can get deeper.
It can.
And
Yeah.
while there may be ups and downs to it, it doesn't have that same pattern of, becoming less and less. Although if it does in a couple, then that's when they typically have difficulties because they've lost that friendship. And
Hmm.
and so a lot of what we try and do, in our office is you try and figure out, okay, how do you get that friendship back?
Right. Which I think is a lot of what this list is that we're going to
Right,
get
right.
into. So I'm just going to jump straight to the second one and then we'll come back to the
Uh-huh.
first one. And the
I,
reason why, and the reason why is because I know that you're going to have a issue with the wording because the second one is fight skillfully and you don't like the word fight.
I don't. I don't. I think that couples shouldn't fight. I think they
Yes.
should have discussions, They can have conflict, and to me,
Yes.
conflict is different than
Yes.
fighting.
Yeah.
But so I would prefer that it says successful couples move through conflict skillfully.
Right. And that's exactly what I put in the outline. And I saw that and I'm
uh,
like, oh, Mark's not gonna like that. So I said good conflict resolution. Successful
yeah,
couples
yeah,
have good
yeah,
conflict. And we've done an entire episode on this that
yeah.
you can go back and listen to because conflict is inevitable.
Yes,
And
it always is. But people should expect that, and that
yeah.
that you can actually be skillful at resolving conflict. Yeah, and we talked about
Yeah.
that in other episodes.
And I think a big part of that too is knowing when you're flooded, right?
Yes,
Is knowing
right, right.
when you're flooded and when it's time to say this conflict is no longer productive, let's take 10 and, come back to it, right?
Right. And so just, the word flooded, I use that a lot.
Mhm.
That then it ties back to the way we started the episode is that if you have high stress or high anxiety, then you flood more easily.
Yes.
And that's one of the components of like if you have conflict and you're stressed, then your ability to realize that you're flooding and taking a break, it goes down. I see couples all the time where they know they're flooding and they know they're going down that road.
Mhm.
That again, Gottman says, don't go down that road because
Yeah.
nothing good is going to happen on that road. And couples know that,
Mhm.
but it's really hard for them to pull back. And I think a lot of that is their process because they feel like they aren't being heard.
Yeah.
And that's typically a pattern
Right.
in relationships that are struggling, and that just goes back to the listening well. That couples often don't listen well to each other. But anyway, that's all about skillful conflict resolution.
Right, which we've done an entire episode
Yeah.
on if you want to go back and listen to it because we talk a lot about how to resolve conflict well.
Hmm.
So going back to the first one, and by the way, I will have this article posted in our show notes.
Right.
So you can go through and read it. So they enjoy each other.
Yeah.
And I think this goes back to just they're good friends, right?
Right. But also, again, if you have kids and you don't have a lot of time, then you have to figure out what is it that you used to do or what is it that you can do now because we are
Mhm.
dynamic through the lifespan. What is it that you can do now that leads to enjoying each other? I might be sitting outside on the deck and having, a glass of wine or tea or something like that, and you enjoy that, or you enjoy nature, or you go on a hike. And so, what I suggest to couples is they make a list, because often, if you have time, like, oh, we've got an hour, what are we going to do? And some couples spend the whole hour trying to figure out what are we going to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
When if you really sit down and make a list, and then you can, if you have this time, all of a sudden you can say, well, we haven't done that in a while, or listen to an audiobook together. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do. Take a walk around the block, or
Yeah.
walk the dog together, something like that. So find out what it is that you enjoy doing together.
And so something that, this made me think of is, you know, in my own relationship, when something positive happens or when something good happens, often Curtis is the first person I think about. He's the first person I want to go to, right? When
Hmm.
something like that happens. And so and I genuinely enjoy activities and doing things with him. So cycling has become a huge part of my life and I love cycling with him. Now, I mean, we don't always get to do all of our cycling events together, but I look forward to those almost the most is just when I get to go do a ride with Curtis. And so,
Yeah,
again, it's like it goes back to this idea of we're good friends. And
yeah,
so we
yeah,
like each other and we want to share things that are happening in our world.
yeah.
So seek and offer forgiveness. I think that's a critical one.
Right. And so, again, to me, this ties into skillful conflict resolution because,
Mm,
and I know today, I'm referencing Gottman a lot, but, he's the couple guy.
yeah.
And so, what he found the quickest way to de-escalate a conflict is for each of you to acknowledge your own part
Yeah.
in whatever it was going on. I've seen this happen in my office. If you can get each person to say, well, I did this and this, I would like to do something different. So if you acknowledge the part you played in the conflict and you both do that,
Yeah.
then it feels like you're in it together. But what happens is the ability to offer, seek forgiveness and offer forgiveness. Like I'm always surprised at how many couples, one of them will say, that person never says I'm sorry or never
Mhm.
apologizes. And I think that's really important because you're acknowledging, whatever it is that happened. And if you try and just brush it under the carpet, whatever it is, that is not going to work because the other person's going to carry around all these resentments with them and it becomes a heavy load. So I think seeking and offering forgiveness, choosing to let go,
Yeah.
okay, which is a little bit different than forgiveness.
Yeah.
I always think of forgiveness as a social contract, meaning I acknowledge the thing I did and I say I'm really going to try not to do that again. Can you forgive me? See, and so I have to do something if you're going to forgive me.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we can choose just to let it go,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Well, and I think that's an important component for successful couples is when you say, yes, I forgive you, you have to mean it and not bring it up, right?
Yeah.
Not use that
Right.
because
Right.
that's
You really need to
so
let it go.
you do. Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I think couples do that often is they'll bring it back and they'll use it to bludgeon their partner in another conflict. That's
And
not
that never
good.
works.
It
Don't
doesn't.
don't
Yeah.
do that. I think the reason people do that, for me, it goes back to they haven't felt heard. So
Mm, yeah.
if they're bringing it up in future discussions, I think it's because it really isn't resolved. And so that's
Hmm.
good information for you to know. You need, if it keeps being brought up, you probably need to go back and figure out how do you resolve this better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So in it for the long haul, I think this just stems to commitment, right? Are
That's all
you
it is.
committed? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned before, I can't remember this guy's name out of the University of Denver, and his whole basis of research was about commitment and
Hmm.
that it's not really about being married,
Hmm.
it's about the commitment.
Yeah.
And so you can have unmarried couples together if they are totally committed, then it works just as well as a marriage. So it really is. It's just all about commitment.
Yeah. Yep.
When they say the long haul, I think what that means is you don't go, you have a conflict and maybe it's going on for a bit that in your mind and you don't think it and you don't say it. Oh, maybe we should just get a divorce.
Yes.
That couples who are in it for the long haul do not say that,
Hmm.
because the attitude is we will work through this, whatever this is.
Yes. Yes. So advice that I was given when I first got married is right before Kurt and I got married is don't let divorce be a word in your vocabulary.
I agree with that. And I see that way too often. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's because we talk about it a lot in our culture.
Yeah.
Why is it so easy for some people to go there? Like
Hmm.
as opposed to let's figure this out. Oh, I'll just quit. I mean, that's really what you're saying.
Yep.
And I think for a lot of people, it might be easier to quit than say acknowledge their own part in whatever it is that's going on. But so yeah, I agree with that. If you want to have a successful relationship, all these things build on each other. By the way, I mean,
They
if you have
do.
friendship
Yep.
and you have
Yep.
time together and you're committed, and then you don't, and you have a skillful conflict resolution, and you never say, well, maybe we should just get a divorce.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and he said that sometimes people will throw it out, sometimes you just throw it out even jokingly, but you do
well,
that enough,
I
then
don't. Well, yeah, jokingly, but I have had. I mean, not maybe one or two times in my career where one person has thrown that out. Let's just get a divorce, and it was actually a test for the other
mm,
person,
yeah,
and they wanted to see if the other person would fight for them or take it.
yep,
And the problem was the other person said, "Okay, fine," and then went through a divorce. And that person who threw it out first didn't want it,
yep,
and so if you say that, don't ever say it unless you mean it.
yep,
And so I have seen it where they didn't mean it and it turns out poorly.
Yeah. And so, but I think it's something you should bring up maybe periodically or just something along the lines of, you know, divorce is not an option for me.
Hmm.
Right. I think that's a much better way of saying it is because I mean it's kind of implied. No, I don't think nobody gets married thinking they're going to get divorced someday. Otherwise, why would you do it?
Right.
Right. And so in the beginning, it's easy to say, "Oh no, that's divorce. We're never going to get divorced. That's not an option." But, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, things have changed. I think it's good to just say, I'm still in this. Like divorce is still not an option for me. This is not a
Yeah.
word. This is not something I even want, I would consider.
Yeah. And so, we don't want to go into too much infidelity because
Hmm.
infidelity is a harder issue that we've talked about. And so I understand that some people, if their partner's been not faithful to them, that their option is to divorce. But I
Yeah.
do want to say that I've seen many couples make it through
Yeah.
infidelity. But it goes back to that one we're talking about of forgiveness, seeking forgiveness, and
Yeah.
that's a big part of it.
Hmm.
Okay.
All right. So positive about each other.
Hmm.
This is, I think, an important one to establish early on. And I think it's established early on with your family of origin, right? Because
Right.
oftentimes when you first get married, you can, it's probably pretty common to be very still connected with your family of origin.
Hmm.
And that might also depend on kind of where you're at in life, I realize too. But you can establish this early on by only saying positive things about your spouse to your family of origin and not involving them in your conflict. One of my
Hmm.
favorite phases is, parents and family, they very much belong in your life. They do not belong in your marriage. Keep them out of your marriage. If you're having conflict, don't involve them.
Right. Right. So again, going back to Gottman, I don't know if he's the one who came up with this, but he really believes that negative comments have such power that it takes 5 positive comments to equal a negative comment. And what that means is, if you're doing 5 positive for each negative, then you're kind of at a neutral level. And so to have a positive relationship, you really need more than uh,
Yeah.
that ratio of 5 to 1. And so the words he uses, and if people are reading his books, he will talk about negative sentiment override and positive sentiment override. And all that means is, so for negative sentiment override, you're stuck
Hmm.
in that negative spiral. And the only way out of it is to increase your positive comments.
Yeah.
And again, we've talked about gratitude practice, where it tends to redirect your focus to the positive. But he has a great exercise called I think he calls it the appreciate exercise, which I often give to couples, where couples, if they're in conflict and they haven't resolved the conflict, or stress
Hmm.
often does this, then they forget to talk about the positive things or the things they appreciate in their partner. And that is really important. And so,
Yeah.
just expressing the appreciation is really important for a relationship.
I think another kind of component that goes along with this in terms of being positive is being careful not to compare as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
So, and maybe this is just a female thing. I don't know if this happens among males, but when females become friends, they often talk about their spouses, right? And
Hmm.
it's normal just to talk about your familial life and your spouse and some of the things they do. And it can be really easy to fall into the trap of, oh, I wish my husband did that, or I wish my
Yeah.
spouse did that. That's dangerous territory. That's not
Right.
being positive about your partner. That that's negative. I would call that negative sentiment of I wish my spouse was like that or I wish my spouse would do that. You're not married to that spouse, you're married to your spouse. And so you need to
Right.
focus on the good things that they do instead of what you wish they would do.
Right. Because there's no perfect relationship.
Yeah.
And what we forget is to really focus on things we like or appreciate about the other person.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so never stop dating. We kind of already touched on this. I think this goes back to just you have to keep being friends and you have to work on I mean, relationships
Right.
take focus, and so you have, make your relationship a priority at some point in some way, despite
And
having very busy lives.
right. And I think it's important to realize dating doesn't mean, oh, I have to go out to dinner and a movie
Yeah,
every week. I mean,
yeah,
dating does not have to involve money. I think using the word dating really is just we are going to spend a focused amount of time with each other doing something, then
So,
I mean so I'd like our listeners to really be able to expand that definition of what does dating mean, because
yeah.
a lot of people go out and you do something.
Mhm.
You can't, long-term relationships with kids, you can't do that.
Right. Go for a walk. That's
Yep. Right.
that's a perfect thing to do. So even before Bill moved in with us, we were able to do that. So because we have a home security system, and so in the evenings after the kids go to bed, we would arm the system, and then we had a camera in our living room so we could kind of periodically check to make sure none of the kids were up. We stayed within like probably less than a quarter mile of the house.
Hmm.
And so we were able to get out that way, and we waited until
Yeah.
we knew the kids were asleep, so it was quiet. That counts. That counts as
Yeah.
dating.
Right. Right. It does. It's just focus time
Yeah.
together.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We jumped by one. Successful couples learn and grow together, which I think is important. That a
Oh,
lot of
okay.
couples don't realize we are dynamic through the lifespan,
Yeah.
and so who you are at 20 is not going to be who you are at 60. I mean, it's just not. And
Okay.
so you have to be able to grow with each other, learn and grow, and stay active
Yep.
in say intellectual pursuits or emotional pursuits, and grow together. So
Yeah. I'm and I'm being aware enough of one another's world and what's going on in one another's world to recognize maybe when those changes are coming.
yeah,
So because if you and your spouse are regularly talking about work and maybe they start complaining more about work or they start talking about all the things they hate about work, is this a big shift coming? Is your partner getting ready to say, "Oh, I can't do this anymore," or "I want
yeah,
something different"? That's not going to feel like such a shock to you
yeah.
if you're
And
involved.
I hear that often. So you need
Yeah.
different interests and listening or reading to books together, things like that.
Mm.
There's so many things that couples can do that and really it takes a little effort and focus is
Yeah.
all. But
Yep.
you need to, I mean, out of all of these 10 things, I mean, the takeaway is you need to focus on your relationship. You
Yeah.
can't, you can't just let it go and think, oh, it'll be okay. You
Hmm.
focus, and this is what I tell couples, you focus on that relationship every single day.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So bring each other joy.
Hmm. See, to me, I was curious because it seems like
That's,
that's the same as number one,
yep. I think
which is
so too.
successful couples enjoy each other.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's focusing more on maybe doing things
That
for
was,
the other person
that was
that
my thought
tends to
too.
bring them joy. And so I can see how they separated a little bit. But I think what that means is that most days you're thinking about what can I do to make this marriage better, and often that's I could like Lindy took my car and washed it and vacuumed it out, which
Hmm.
I tend to let my car go quite a bit. Anyway, so she thought, and that was a nice thing for her to do. So it's something like that.
Yeah, it's you're looking for, instead of just thinking about your own needs and your own
Right,
desires, is what
right,
can I
right.
do to help my spouse have a better day or my partner
Yep,
have a better day? How
yep.
can I
That's
help
it.
ease their burden? Yeah, if you're doing that more, and not that you need to put all of your own needs or wants on hold, because that's not going to work either. But
Hmm.
if more often than not, because I think sometimes we have stressful situations like a crisis at work, or maybe a crisis with the extended family, or something is going on where you need more support. I think that's okay. But
Well, that ties into the next one.
yep,
which
the 60/40 rule. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I do believe that, as it mentions that often you think you go into marriage thinking it's 50-50, and it's really not, or it
No.
shouldn't be. I think it
Yeah.
works better if it's in this list it's 60-40, meaning you both always give 60 and take 40,
Yep.
and that does make for a successful relationship. You're giving more than you're taking.
Yes, because I mean, I think part of a good relationship is that you do lean on each other, right? And that's very comforting. And that's, that I mean, that's one of the most comforting things about my marriage, is the fact that when I'm struggling, I have somebody I can go to. I have somebody I can talk to. I have somebody I can lean on. And that feels good to us, and it feels good to be the person to lean on.
Yeah.
but you have to be careful about how much you're taking. So yeah, that
Right.
60/40 rule is
Right.
give more than you take.
Yeah. The last one, having shared values.
Hmm.
So you probably know what I thought about here is that we've mentioned that book lies at the altar all the time.
Yep.
And I think that, those 287 questions that you talk about really help you figure out if you have the same values.
Yeah.
Because often, you find a marriage where you get into it and you figure, well, someone doesn't have that same value, whatever it is.
Hmm.
It mentions in this list, like if you're a spender, because we have spenders and savers,
Hmm.
and it's not that you both have to be the same. It's just that if you're a spender, then your spouse needs to understand what that is
Yeah.
for you, and you probably have to meet somewhere in the middle.
Hmm.
If there's a middle ground between spending and saving. So that's just an example of a value. But I think that if you do, let's use a business term, if you do your due diligence
Yep.
before you make that commitment by going over those questions, then I think you have a greater chance of having the same value, which is important because
Hmm.
it decreases conflict.
It does. And so when I hear shared values, I can't help but think of religion. And that's again just tying it into my own religion or my own marriage is because those of you new to the podcast may not know that I mean Curtis and I met in January. We started dating the beginning of April, got engaged in June and married in October, which
Hmm.
and I was 19,
Yeah. Okay.
right? So
Statistically, you shouldn't be together now.
we shouldn't.
Is what that means.
Yeah, statistically, right? But I mean, it's been almost 13 years. It's been
Hmm.
just over 13 years since he proposed to me, and it's worked out incredibly well for us.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that really comes down to we had shared values from the beginning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
both of us, we knew we wanted somebody whose main priority was religion, right? Who made religion the center of their lives. We knew we both were looking for somebody who did that. We both wanted kids, and we both wanted me to be a stay-at-home mom and Curtis to be the breadwinner. And those were kind of core elements or important things that we both wanted, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's a big reason why we've been able to make it work.
Right. But I do want to mention that I certainly see many couples who don't have the same religious or spiritual
Yes.
views, and they have
Hmm.
very successful relationships because I think it goes back to, one of the things that Harville Hendricks says,
Yeah.
that one of the principal tasks of marriage or long-term relationships is learning to be comfortable with difference,
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
you don't marry yourself, you actually marry someone else. And so
Yeah.
when we say shared values, you do not have to have every single value the same
No,
to have a successful relationship.
I don't think
You
it's
do have to
possible.
understand the difference
Yeah.
in your values, and might be the important thing, you have to accept that the other person is different and that there are other qualities or other things that keep you together. You don't have to think the same on every single issue. You and I can talk forever about relationships,
I know. I was
which
wondering, I
I
was like,
like a lot.
I know, I do too. So, I think the reason why relationships are it's why it's such an important topic for us is 'cause I think was because we get so much joy and satisfaction
Hmm.
out of our own marriages,
Yeah,
right? I
yeah.
mean, and
Um,
so,
I, I was going to say, I don't. Probably listeners know this. Lindy and I met when we were 16,
hmm.
but we didn't get married till 5 years later. But so there's this pretty strong basis of friendship
Hmm.
um, that we have, and so I think that the takeaway is for me. I always like to do takeaways.
Yeah.
It's focus. She said a long-term relationship takes focus every single day,
Yeah.
and if you start to neglect it, that's when things start to go poorly.
Yep. You're gonna start to have more
Yep.
conflict. And
Yep.
once that conflict does start creeping in and everything, that doesn't make it too late. It just means you need to take time to refocus
Right.
and recenter.
Right. That's right.
So, yeah. Well, I actually thought we might have to divide this up into two episodes, so I think we did it.
Okay.
did it in one episode. So if anyone is listening and feels like maybe we skimmed over something too quickly, or if you'd like us to expound on one of these topics, feel free to shoot us an email. We're happy to revisit this topic. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's our
Yeah.
favorite, so we're always happy to revisit and expound on something. Or if you have something that's helped you be successful in your relationship, we'd love to share that with others.
Mhm.
So next week we are going to get into a listener requested topic. So we were asked to do an episode on emotionally abusive parents.
Mhm.
And we have talked in the past about childhood trauma and kind of recovering from that. And we've talked about maybe some problematic parenting patterns, but we're going to really focus on what does it look like to be, or for a parent to be emotionally abusive, and kind of how kids can cope with that as an adult.
Yeah, and sadly it happens. I
It-
wish it didn't, but it
Yeah.
does. And a lot of those people and couples end up in a therapist's office for help. So we'll talk about that next week.
Yep. It's going to be a good episode. We will see you all next week. Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.